Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, you're a Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about just the overall international architecture of mass migration. Now, we can be under no illusion here that mass migration is completely controlled, totally controlled by the globalist deep state World Economic Forum. Sovereign or local Western governments have no sovereignty. They've got no input into the decision at all. This is being decided in globalisation, head office, central, and then the governments like Australia or Britain or America are told, you will do this. And then they dutifully run around and do it. That's why Donald Trump was such a challenge, because he thought as the elected president of the United States, he actually got to make a decision about migration, but the globalists quickly disabused President Trump of that notion. You don't decide anything, buddy. You may be the elected president, but we make the fucking decisions, and don't you damn well forget it. So let's just have a look. Now, let's go back to a time of the early 1900s in Britain, a very vibrant, booming economy, lots of new industries appearing, internal combustion engines, electronics, the early, the revolution in electronics, and things like street lighting in those days, chemicals. There were a lot of new industries appearing, a huge demand for skills, and people that knew about it. So these are new frontiers. Chemical engineering is a new frontier, and optics and so on. Now, Britain wasn't necessarily at the forefront of all of these, but was certainly, being a leading industrial power at the time, the richest country in the world, was certainly a prominent player in that, with Germany and the United States fast catching up, or even surpassing them in some areas, particularly in the newer technologies. But nonetheless, a vibrant, booming economy, a vast empire, huge trade, and so on. The city of London was the financial capital of the world, and so this was a boom time, and again a huge demand for skills in the new industries and so on. So what was the migration rate for, how many migrants were coming to Britain each year at the time? And there would have been gazillions, gazillions upon gazillions, surely. Well, no, as a matter of fact, the net migration was, for each year there was about 10,000, give or take. I mean, one year it might be 9,000, the next 11,000, but in the vicinity of 10,000 net migrants a year. Now, there was a lot of tourists and people visiting, and you'd have tourism of 500,000 plus a year. Remember, this is the great empire of Britain, the dazzling centre of the universe at the time, just over 100 years ago, by the way. That shows just how quickly empires can fall. And but they only needed 10,000 people. Now, I don't know, all these 10,000 people, they weren't all rocket scientists or chemical engineers, but there was a decent swag of folks there that were coming to Britain. Now, the idea that the British had was a simple one. If these people are highly accomplished in their field, they can speak decent English or good English, and there's a position for them and this sort of thing, then why not? Now, some of these people were visiting academics, for example, that may stay for a few years, then go back. So they weren't all people that would stay in Britain, but nonetheless. But so that was a booming economy with huge demand for skills. That was what it was. Now, if I look at the migration lists to Australia in, say, the 1960s, which was a boom time for the amount of migrants coming to Australia. And in spite of, with a population of less than 10 million at the time, Australia was bringing in something like 100,000 migrants a year, which is given the population, that was viewed back in the day as being huge numbers. And yet, in spite of these large numbers coming in, the price of real estate between sort of 1960 and 1970 barely moved at all. In fact, in purchasing power terms, real estate, buying a family home became cheaper in 1970 than it was in 1960 in purchasing power terms. So that sort of in spite of more than 1 million immigrants, something like 1.2 million, I think, coming in over that to Australia, coming in over that period. Now, there was a bit of a difference, though. If you look at sort of like the migrant ships that would come from Europe, and the Australian government subsidised this to some extent, but the migrant ships coming, you look at the sort of for example, I'll use round numbers here. There's 100 people came on the ship, and you'd see that there was 5 architects, 12 carpenters, 9 plumbers, 7 electricians, 23 nurses, and so on. 1 doctor, and so there was 2 dentists. So if you look at the qualifications of the people coming, there were a few labourers, and there were some of those, but they would have other factors. They were young, and they had 3, 4, 5 children or something like that. So there were those sorts of things. But so their value was perceived in different ways. But most of them spoke English or good English or function. Even where you had say, I don't know, people coming from Greece or Italy or something like that, they had a requirement to at least pass an English competency test. So I remember there was a place where we were living. There was an Italian migrant family came over, and the parents spoke broken English, but passable. But the children had been to an English tutelage type school, so they arrived speaking English. You get a bit of an accent, but it was pretty decent. So there were a lot of skilled migrants, most of whom, not all, but most of whom spoke good English. Now, even in the case where looking at one sort of ship's passenger manifest here, it was primarily Italian from the looks of it, and some Maltese coming to Australia. And again, they were at the sort of the lower end of the trade, like bricklayers or concreters, but they had a skill. They could walk straight into a job, and skills that were in demand at the time. And they had minimal, sort of basic English, and what the government was doing at the time was saying, well, we'll put you up in like a hostel, like an army barracks sort of hostel thing, and we'll feed you and that sort of thing, and you can go out and apply for jobs. We'll give you free English classes and lessons, and and so on and so forth. So people were able to get established and find a job and get out and buy a house or rent a place or something like that. And so they're able to get established pretty quickly without having to meet the cost of as soon as you walk off the ship or walk off the plane, you've got to go and immediately rent a place. And there are all sorts of government assistance programs to show you how to fill out forms for, say, I don't know, a rental application and job application and this sort of stuff. So the type of immigrant coming and the numbers of immigrants coming were really pretty consistent with economic need. And if you were a low skill but you had 5 kids that were young, then that was considered an offsetting factor. Okay, well, we can't get much out of you, but you got 5 kids, and that'll be good. So all in all, it was not perfect. No system ever is, but it was pretty decent in terms of bringing skills out to the country, needed skills. Now, the majority of immigrants by far were English-speaking immigrants who spoke English as a first language and had internationally recognised qualifications, whether those were trades like carpentry or other qualifications like engineering or architecture and so on, teaching, nursing, and the like. So really, these people were a boon to the economy. And as I say, even while there was this massive immigration coming in, a good indicator is the price of real estate in purchasing power terms didn't go up. In fact, it slightly went down, as indeed did other expenses. And that's an important consideration, whereas today you see the price of real estate going through the roof. And this is hardly surprising. Now, the immigration today, let's sort of look at the immigration of Britain now. If we look at the numbers of approximately 10,000 immigrants arriving in, say, 1909 in Britain, then which is you'd think, well, that's a small number of such a booming economy with all these new industries such as electronics appearing everywhere, chemicals and so on. But that's all they needed. And could they have done with more or less? Well, we can debate that, but that's all they needed at the time. And to remain at being in the top 4 or 5 countries in the world in those industries. So clearly it was, they had plenty of people. I thought the Germans and the Americans did a better job of educating the top flight engineers in those new industries, Germans in particular. But anyway, so if we adjust for population, we say, well, the population of Britain today and the amount of immigrants they need, if we adjust that 10,000 from those days, is probably around, give or take, it's around 25,000. So those are the amount of skilled immigrants that the British economy would need today if they were going to maintain that level. But instead, they're pushing close to 700,000. Now, whether or not some of those people don't stay or go back or don't stay for more than 10 years, or you can play around with the numbers, and there's so much government disinformation and lies and media lies there because they're all trying to justify the high rates of immigration. White people have to be turned into a minority. That's just how it is. That's how the globalists want it. And you disagree with that, you fucking Nazi. So when we look at the numbers, why the 25,000, as in adjusted for overall population, but why does a 25,000 rate of migrant intake suddenly become close to 700,000? That seems utterly insane. Now, the second sort of thing to consider is the amount of people that are brought in migration today that have no skills at all, or have qualifications that aren't recognised. Saying, hey, I've got a 3-week course in carpentry that I got in rural India, or Pakistan or something like that. That's not a recognised qualification. You hear a lot of bleating and screaming from people from poor third world countries and insist that their degree should be treated on par with a Western degree, even though in their countries you traditionally just bribe the lecturer to give you the degree, or the professor to give you a degree. You don't. So the professors themselves have bribed somebody to get their job. The students then bribe them and getting a position of prestige and authority in those countries is simply seen as a conduit for being able to demand bribes from other people. So it's viewed as a ticket to some sort of degree of wealth. Concepts that we don't necessarily understand fully in a first world country, but it's the type of immigrant. We've switched from skilled, first world standards of qualification to unskilled, illiterate in their own language, let alone English or any European language, illiterate third world peasants who maybe never have worked at a job in their lives. And they're the ones that are being brought in. So it's unique. Now, I've gone back in human history, and other than sort of the slavery trade that was conducted all over Europe, for thousands of years, other than the slaves or bringing in large masses of people to complete a specific public works project like, the pyramids in Egypt or something like that. But other than those sort of things, I don't think it's ever happened in human history that masses of unskilled, illiterate peasants have been brought in from a third world country, or a much lesser developed, barbaric sort of place, and brought into the first world country in anything other than tiny numbers. So this is sort of an interesting development, I guess, overall. That we've never seen this type of immigration before, nor has it been done from a centralised international control point like the Globalist World Economic Forum, nor have we had sovereign governments or governments that are no longer sovereign and they're being dictated to by the globalist downtown central, because the international migration is being ramped up everywhere, whether it be in Britain, Australia, or Canada, or the United States, and it's happening everywhere simultaneously. This is clearly coordinated. But looking overall at the migration that certainly in Australia that's being done, the Chinese migration is now the highest, and Indian is second, and really English-speaking country. I think the first English-speaking country to appear on the list is number 4, and they're on a relative basis. They speak English, and there are more skilled people that come in those categories. But with the Chinese, the Indians, and the subcontinent generally, and around the rest of Asia, that most of these people have no skills, and they're illiterate in their own language, and they're coming to Australia to work in economies, work in the underground economy in effect, and to sustain or keep on temporary life support industries that otherwise couldn't survive without this cheap peasant labour. And the size of the economy in Australia now, and the West generally, that is completely relying on illiterate peasant labour to stay alive, is such that now this exceeds the normal economy that has to rely on competitive industry, competitive behaviour, market competitive behaviour, but also has to comply with laws, whether these are laws on employment law and labour relations law, safety laws, and so on. These other places don't have to comply with that, and so they're able to run an artificially low-cost operation that is being really permitted and allowed by the Western authorities, again under the instruction of the globalist deep state World Economic Forum. You've been fantastic today at your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.